The show opens up with the cinematography, the lighting, and the vibe of everything, even with the music, feeling like the show to bring you back into the story. And then what I observed is that it slowly evolved in both the look and the music and the vibe of the story into what it wants to be as its own thing. It actually created its own, which is somewhere in between the Batman, but also kind of like this Sopranos. So I watched the Penguin show, the first episode. That's the only one that's out at the moment. And I wanted to answer this question because I know there's so much online right now. Should you watch the Penguin show? So I'm going to go through a little bit of my thoughts about the show, what might be a good reason for you to watch this show. So if you're not familiar, The Penguin is a series on Max, and it is a follow-up following the Penguin character. I'm so surprised this guy is Colin Farrell. Like the fact that they made him so incredibly large with prosthetics and so ugly, because Colin Farrell's like a skinny, like good looking dude, right? But it's the follow-up to the Batman, the Matt Reeves film. And I know the internet's a little bit torn on this. I feel like people generally liked a lot of things about the Batman. And I'll say I really enjoyed it. I think it's far superior to anything Ben Affleck has done. I don't think it's necessarily better than Chris Nolan's The Dark Knight's films, but I definitely really enjoyed it. And so I was really looking forward to seeing what the show The Penguin does. Now I will say right off the bat, the Penguin show brings you back into this world. So if you watched the Batman and you enjoyed it, well, there's a really good reason to want to watch this show. Just from the first episode, I can say that with pretty strong confidence that if you watched the Batman and enjoyed it, you should watch the show, because it opens up with the theme song, like the one that from the Matt Reeves Batman, is like I don't even remember how it goes, but it's very soft and it's like a downbeat. It's like dun dun, right? And it's just getting you right back into the vibe of it. And we went into a very specific location at the top of the episode that was familiar, that we saw a lot in the Batman. So it feels like we're in the same environment. We have the same music to opening up. And what was fascinating to me about the start of this episode, this show, this new series that's supposed to bridge the gap between this first Batman film and the second one, is the fact that the lighting and cinematography at the beginning of this show, at the first episode, was very reminiscent of the Batman. Now, if you've watched any of my content before, you will know that I am a really big fan of Greg Fraser. He is a director of photography. He's done things like Dune Part 1 and 2. He did The Batman. He did Mandalorian Season 1. And he's an incredibly skilled cinematographer, director of photography. He knows how to light stuff in a way that is just appropriate for the story that's being told. And I'm a really big fan of his work. And so he did the Batman, but he did not return to do this show. But I am pretty sure he is doing the second Batman film, which is going to be coming out, I guess in a few years, maybe. So getting back to the Penguin, the show opens up with the cinematography, the lighting, and the vibe of everything, even with the music, feeling like the show to bring you back into the story. And then what I observed is that it slowly evolved in both the look and the music and the vibe of the story into what it wants to be as its own thing. It doesn't want to just mimic the style and the vibe of the Batman. It actually created its own, which is somewhere in between the Batman, but also kind of like this Sopranos kind of thing, right? It felt very reminiscent of the cinematography style, the nature of the composition, obviously the nature of the Penguin guy specifically. It feels kind of like Tony Soprano. And so it kind of lulls you in and then starts morphing into something new that I'm assuming we're going to live in for the remainder of the season, and then probably get back to that vibe in the second Batman as we saw in the first one. Especially since Greg Fraser's going to return as a cinematographer for the second movie. Now, I will say what was interesting about the Batman was that they not only had super dynamic lighting, it was very specifically crafted to look a certain way, but they actually wanted to feel even more grungy. They wanted it to have this organic, rough feel in the images. And so I did a whole video on it, but I'll briefly say that what they did was they shot everything on digital cameras. They processed it, they color corrected everything, and then they turned and copied those digital images onto film, physical film negatives, processed that film in the chemical process that they used to do for like 35 millimeter. They still do for like IMAX film, like Christopher Nolan stuff. And then they rescanned it back into digital because there's an organic grain, slight coloration differences, everything made to the show, the film itself, the look of the images when you go through that organic process. I did a whole video on it. I'll probably, when I clip this out as a standalone video, so not live, I'll put it at the end screen so people can watch that. However, this film is a lot more clean. And like I said, it kind of has a Sopranos vibe to it. It starts off feeling like the Batman with all the aesthetic and the music and everything, and it morphs into something that I would say is more reminiscent of the Sopranos. It's not quite there, but it's similar. And that's kind of how it made me feel. I really like the beginning because there's always this problem with storytelling of exposition dumps, right? Exposition dumps are some of the most cringiest things you can see in a show or in movies, and this show handled it perfectly. If people didn't watch the Batman, it would help if you had, but if people were confused about where we were in the story, they know this is the Penguin character from the Batman, so where are we? Is this after the first movie? Is this before the first movie? Without the characters just saying like obvious things that it would be obvious to other characters, what they did was they opened with a series of news broadcasts relaying the damage from the end of the first movie and basically saying like a week has passed since the end of the Batman, where like the Falcone boss leader was killed, the city was flooded, everything's in chaos right now. And so they got a whole bunch of setup and exposition, but not in a cringy way, in a way that actually made a lot of sense. So I really appreciated that. I really appreciated the effort and creativity. And so basically here's another reason why I think you should watch it. It's written intelligently. If you enjoy things that are written in a way that's like Sopranos, that's written with a lot of character depth, that doesn't feel like it's just regurgitating everything to you, and you like the process of sitting down and enjoying a well-crafted, well-characterized, and well-performed show, then I think you should watch this show. If you are a person that kind of likes to scroll on your phone and just sort of halfway pay attention, I wouldn't worry about it because you're going to be lost. You're going to be lost. This is a show you have to pay attention to. So, if you're a person who likes to pay attention to your shows, definitely check this out. This is also just kind of a breath of fresh air in my mind because I've seen so many garbage things. The past couple weeks, I've been looking at the Rings of Power and how frustrating everything is in that show. This is just a breath of fresh air as we're wrapping up in the next 2 weeks, the Rings of Power, just trying to be like, something that feels like I can actually sit down and enjoy it for once, which is really nice. It gives me a lot of hope for the upcoming Dune series that Max is also doing. Have you seen any trailers for that and you watched the Dune movies? Like I said, Greg Fraser was the director of photography on those. Max is coming out with a show that's a prequel show, not a prequel, but like before the Paul Atreides story about the Bene Gesserit witches. If you're familiar with that, Max is coming out with that. I'm really optimistic about that show, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it on the channel as well. Let's see. As I said, the general vibe is enjoyable. If you are not into dark shows, I'm not going to say you have to be a fan of Game of Thrones, but I will say there's some graphic stuff, right? It's a little bit more graphic, I would say, even in the first episode of this show. Actually, it's a lot more graphic in the first episode of this show than it was in the Batman movie. So the Batman movie was like PG-13. This feels like a rated R show, or is it MTV 17, something like that. So it's if you like darker shows, or if that doesn't bother you, you kind of find the ability to dive into them. It was made by, Max. They're the same people that currently stream Game of Thrones and currently stream The Sopranos, right? It's the same vibe as Sopranos. I'm gonna be honest with you. This feels like Tony Soprano, sort of. It feels like a version of Tony Soprano was just shoved into Gotham and had to become a new character that wasn't just Tony Soprano. That's kind of what it feels like. So if you're a big fan of The Sopranos, if you're a big fan of Batman stories, and you're interested in diving into a iconic villain that we haven't seen any real incredible adaptations of as the Penguin, you should watch this show. If you are a big fan of the Batman comics, well, I don't think I'm going to have to convince you of this, but you probably won't like this show. You'll probably enjoy the writing because it's written well. You probably can enjoy aspects of it. But if you're a big fan of like the comic Batman stories, you probably also didn't like the movie, The Batman, right? So you probably fundamentally disagree with Matt Reeves' approach to the Batman. So I'm going to say you probably won't enjoy the show. You probably also should watch it so you can have valid arguments. And maybe you run a YouTube channel where you talk about comic books and DC and Marvel stories or something. But you should watch this show and talk about if it holds up, if it's any good. What I've heard is that people who are fan of the comics of Batman aren't super into this Matt Reeves Batman film. And so I'm assuming they're also not going to like the Penguin. I'm not a big comic guy. I'm a movie guy. I'm a filmmaking guy. I like cinematography and editing, and I like all that stuff. So that's what I pay attention to. And quality of story, how it makes you feel over what it's trying to tell you. Those are the kind of things I care about. So a point I want to just bring up is the fact that good filmmaking, good storytelling, in my opinion, is not subjective. Now, taste is very diverse, but good and bad is not a subjective thing. What I believe is that there is actually good shows that can be identified, and you know it when you see it. In fact, you feel it when you see it, as opposed to something that is bad, right? And you feel it when you know that something's bad. So you could say, the Penguin's not my thing, but you can also acknowledge that it's objectively good because you felt like it was authentic, right? As opposed to The Acolyte, the Star Wars Acolyte show that just been ripped in half online the past few months, with good reason. When you watch that show, people who said they enjoyed it, I think, are not real Star Wars fans, first off, but also I don't think they're really paying attention and noticing how it makes them feel, right? Because if you feel apathetic towards it, if it makes you upset, if it makes you bored, if it makes you feel cringy, right? And not in like a way that's intentional. It's just like someone doesn't know how to deliver lines, or the writing is so incredibly dull that it just feels cringy coming out of these characters' mouths. You just know how it makes you feel. And I personally believe that taste is diverse and something can be your thing or not your thing. However, I think good and bad is not subjective. I think it is pretty obvious, and you gauge that on how it made you feel. And I think when it comes down to it, everyone will learn to agree on those facts. It may not be your thing, the Penguin. I think it is my thing. However, I can say with confidence, this is a good show. It is written very well. The characters are engaging and it feels fun to me so far. And I'm only on episode 1. I'm not even sure how many episodes there'll be, but I am very engaged with this. And kudos to the cinematographers for at the very beginning of the episode making it feel aesthetically, lighting and everything just like Greg Fraser's The Batman to get us into the story, and then shift into your own color palette, your own lighting styles. But it started the show feeling like we're in the same world, and so it had that. It didn't feel like we skipped a beat. That was really brilliant. So that's what I have on the Penguin. Let me know if you guys watched the episode in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. I want to hear what you have to say about this.